Good.
Okay. And then I have 9 o'clock. So are we good to go? Yes, Maggie, green light.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Good for
Okay.
me. Yes.
Okay. Excellent. So hi, everyone. Thank you for those of you who are joining us today. And hopefully we get some folks who watch this recording after the fact to get some more information about the Accessibility Fellowship. My name is Emily Bovier. I'm an associate professor in the psychology department. I was a faculty fellow for the accessibility program in 2021, and I've taken on the role of the faculty coordinator position for the 2024 cohort. So today is mainly meant to be just an informal discussion with the current accessibility fellows so that folks who are interested in applying for the program, whether it be in 2025 or in future years, just get some firsthand commentary on what the program is like. So before I turn it over to the fellows, and I just have a couple of questions to ask them just to give you all some context about the fellowship. As far as a brief introduction, the Accessibility Fellowship for faculty lasts 1 calendar year, so it's from January to December. Faculty fellows are eligible either to receive one course release for their efforts, or they can take a stipend for their efforts. I personally took a stipend. I know my department was pretty crunched for courses during the time that I was a fellow. So it's nice that there is also that stipend opportunity as well, if for some reason you're in a position where it's not practical to have a course release. You can take that either in the fall or the spring semester. And essentially, the faculty fellows are responsible for exploring best practices regarding digital accessibility, and then universal design for learning and inclusive pedagogy more broadly speaking. So throughout the fellowship, they develop expertise regarding accessibility and can even focus in on more discipline-specific information, because ultimately the goal for this, in addition to developing accessibility skills, is to be a coach or an advocate. So part of the experience with the fellows, which more often will come towards the end of their fellowship, is to connect these practices to broader diversity, equity, and inclusion and access initiatives, and share their knowledge with others and become advocates for accessibility. So typically, the way the fellowship works is that the first semester, the spring semester, is mainly spent on developing a culture of accessibility. So the faculty fellows engage in workshops related to skills for accessibility, but we also meet every 2 weeks as a group just to develop that culture and brainstorm ideas off of each other. I'm still continuously learning with this, so it's great to be part of that group. So during that time is just learning best practices of accessibility and brainstorming different ideas with each other through that first semester. The advocacy essentially starts right now after their first semester, where faculty fellows host a discussion just like this so that others understand what the program is like. And then into the fall semester, we start meeting a little bit less because that's where a bulk of the work goes into revising a single course. So each fellow is actively working on a course, and after they develop the necessary skills, they can then implement those with a course that they are revising. And that typically happens in the fall semester. And then once the fellowship wraps up, we have faculty fellows host individual breakout sessions during winter breakouts related to something that they are specifically interested in. It might be something like a particular skill, like making accessible PowerPoints, or it could be something that's more overarching related to diversity, equity, inclusion, and access. So for today, I will introduce the 3 faculty fellows, and then I will just moderate the discussion that we have. It's very informal. Folks in the audience, if you have questions, feel free to jump in, unmute yourself. I will do my best to monitor the chat to see if anything comes through in the chat as well. So for our faculty fellows, we have Susan DiBlasi with Health Promotion and Wellness, Ashlee Moore with the Department of Psychological Sciences, and Amy Shore with Cinema and Screen Studies. So to start us off, I would just like each of the fellows to just briefly introduce yourself and talk to us about your motivation for applying for the Accessibility Fellowship. So let's start with Sue.
Took me a second to unmute myself. Good morning, everyone. My motivation primarily, well, I'm Susan DiBlasi. I'm in health promotion and wellness. I'm the coordinator of the athletic coaching minor. And through my time in athletics, I find that oftentimes people are, for lack of a better word, presumptuous about confidence and abilities and what comes to maybe what they perceive easily to a certain population. And so my motivation for wanting to get involved is my background in understanding that sometimes people have a facade of what's easy, and underneath it all there are struggles and challenges, and I wanted to be able to eliminate some of the hurdles that, you know, especially with my online courses, that you may not even know exist because you don't know what someone's struggles are. And sometimes those struggles are more apparent, but oftentimes they're invisible. And so once we can learn and uncover more about how to make things smoother for our users, then I think that we open a window for people to ask more questions and be more comfortable and have it become a more of a safe place and less of an intimidating environment. So that was ultimately my motivation for wanting to learn more and get my class more up to speed with those things.
Excellent, thank you. So let's turn it over to Amy.
Hi, I'm Amy Shore. I'm in the Department of Cinema and Screen Studies. So what brought me to be interested in this is that when we founded Cinema and Screen Studies, one of the key ideas was to make accessible filmmaking to students who typically don't have that access because other programs have portfolio reviews and require a lot of technology and large budgets, you know, or credit cards from parents. And so the definition of accessibility, I think that we worked on was availability, like making things available. And when we hit the pandemic, like everybody else, I think we ourselves started to understand accessibility issues as they related to the digital world. Because we were facing our own challenges, and becoming dependent upon that environment really made it glaring what kind of gaps there were for our students, all of them, whatever their learning capacity is, et cetera, because of the way we were preparing materials and providing and delivering them, but certainly for our students who have learning differences. And so I sort of stepped in from the whole team at Cinema and Screen Studies has been concerned about this. And I said, you know what, I'm really particularly interested in it. So I'll be the one who sees if I can become a fellow and bring it back. So that was what compelled me to become a fellow. And so far, working out, finding out, lots to fix.
Excellent, thank you. And Amy highlighted one of the big aspects of this fellowship is to bring information back to your department. So even though it's a singular professional development opportunity for the individual faculty, the ultimate goal is to bring information back to departments and continue to spread that knowledge and advocacy. Along that same lines, I'm going to turn it over to Ashlee, who is in the same department as me. So even if you have had a fellow in your department before, there is always room for growth. So Ashlee is going to continue to bring a lot to the table. It's not a one-stop shop. So even if there is faculty who are interested, who have had a faculty fellow in their department before, we will continue to advocate and encourage department chairs to approve fellowships for folks who want to continue to develop accessibility initiatives. So I'll turn it over to Ashlee for her introduction. Oh, Ashlee, I think you're muted.
I'm muted. Yep. I was just about to say I'm muted. I'm Ashlee Moore. I'm in the Department of Psychological Sciences with Emily. So, like she said, one of the main reasons that I was interested in the accessibility fellowship was really seeing her example, and kind of knowing maybe from a little bit more of an insider's perspective of what goes on and what kind of work is done. I thought it was really interesting, especially some of Emily's research she did while she was a fellow about and how she's applied it beyond that in terms of neurodiversity and especially being applicable to psychological sciences. So it was something I've been interested in and really attempting to kind of do on my own, in terms of going to the workshops online, trying to kind of like piecemeal put together how to make courses more accessible. And so when the announcement for the fellowship came out, my main motivation was just, it felt like this was finally an opportunity that I could like have a rationale to say like, no, I'm actually going to do this for a full course because I have this protected time. I have a group of people that I'm going to be working with instead of just, doing it when I can, trying to like pick up little pieces of information and see what sticks essentially. So I thought this was a really good opportunity if it's something you're interested in, that it's like, that's that time you need to really like just focus on it and make progress if you haven't been able to before.
Great, thank you. So the other two questions that I have for the fellows are mainly just open-ended questions. So folks can just feel free to jump in and comment as you like. And then again, anyone in the audience, if you have questions for us, just feel free to jump in as well. So two remaining questions are essentially your expectations in the fellowship. Are they being met? Are they being exceeded? Do you wish there was more? I have cruised through the interim reports from the fellows already, so I know some of these responses. And then the last final point that we'll address today is just one big takeaway from each of the fellows that they can share out with the group of just what's the biggest takeaway that they have had so far. So let's start with your general progress in the fellowship as it relates to your expectations for the fellowship. And anyone can jump in.
I'll go first. I realized in the first training session we had that I had no clue what I was expecting from this. I guess there's just a lot of things I didn't know. Some of them really simple, but fundamental. Like, I feel dopey sometimes telling things I didn't know. About using templates that are standardized for all of your documents so that screen readers can read them effectively. I thought that me bolding and me using this, number 1, number 2, number 3 was fine. And I just didn't realize that even something as basic and as everyday as writing up documents has an accessibility issue. And so it hit me pretty fast that I had gotten involved in something that was much more part of the everyday life of teaching, not something that you sort of do like, oh, now I'm going to check my course for accessibility. No, it's really like, even in your emails, right? Even in your ways, your modes of offering communication, right, are accessibility issues. So for me, it's been about having a mind shift and then having a real commitment to doing the work, because you want to whip an email out and just get it out. It's hard sometimes to be motivated to make sure it's accessible. So I think that if you want to do this work, you should be prepared to pretty much change everything about at least the architecture of your classes and your communications, because it really is like that kind of level of commitment. And if you do that, I think over time, because I haven't had time yet, it becomes a new way of being, and then it's easier. But if you see this as something you're going to tack on, like, it's not going to really work that well. It'll be, you'll probably practice it for a while, do it for a couple courses and be done. So that's kind of my, oh, I guess that was a takeaway. And it was what my expectations were.
It's a great
something
way
different.
to, yeah.
Sorry.
So feel free in your responses to, yes, like the big takeaway. And I appreciate the big takeaway of it being, I like how you phrased it in terms of the architecture. And so that's what the fellowship is meant for, is to give you the time, the support, the collaboration to sort of get that foundational information and way of working established. And so even though, you know, it's been 3 years since I've been a fellow, I'm still learning and evolving with what I do, but I'm prepping a new course for this summer. And I have noticed how more automatic it is, right? PDFs, which once felt so daunting to me, now become just a regular part of how I build a module. And so it's just as automatic to me as creating the content for the course. And so the more experience you have with it, the more that you can develop it into just part of your everyday work.
And can I just translate? So in relationship to my expectations experience, my expectation when Emily would say PDFs, I'd be like, oh yeah, there must be sort of like a button I push for my PDFs. I didn't realize that it's much more about identifying the best source for your material in order to generate an effective PDF that can really be accessible by screen readers, thinking about people who are accessing material and maybe aren't using screen readers, but do have an ability to distinguish with colors, ratios, things like this. So yeah, I had expectations that it was like, oh, yeah, we should all use PDFs, not you need to like really get your brain around how you're producing those materials. I'm making it sound really daunting, but it's not. It's actually kind of fun.
No, that's a good point. But like what you're commenting on is exactly what we hope for people to think deeply about the why behind it and to have these different perspectives. Yeah, Ashlee or Susan, you want to share your perspectives?
Okay, I'm not muted. I think in terms of expectations, I think the only difference in terms of expectations versus reality, I guess knowing what I had known going in, I kind of knew that it would be a lot of detailed work in terms of the changes that needed to be made to the course. But I guess in similar vein as Amy, I kind of thought there would be more simple solutions to a lot of it. Not that it's not simple, but I kind of thought there was like a standard answer to many of the questions that we would have, like how do you make PDFs accessible or something like that. But I guess the reality is it's more about understanding what accessibility is and allowing that to inform how you decide what course materials are appropriate, or even just like when you shouldn't you just shouldn't use it. Like one of the big takeaways to skip ahead is kind of that I've had to kind of take a step backwards in terms of some of my course materials, like not really backwards, but instead of making like bending over backwards to make everything accessible, sometimes simply deciding like this is not relevant material that needs to be there, and I don't need to spend all the time in the world. We talked a lot about tables, like to make this fancy table accessible when just don't have it. Like it's not necessary. So I think it's kind of daunting, but in the same way, it's a little bit freeing to be able to say, like, really focus on what's needed for your class. And sometimes it's simpler than you thought it was, especially if you like to overcomplicate things, which I tend to do.
Yeah, that's a great point, especially with the tables. And that was one of the things that I encountered too, is I used to have my course schedule in a table, and then there would be rows embedded within. And then I eventually started the fellowship and realized I can just make this into a Google Doc and break it down in a bulleted list instead. And it actually is easier for me to read and navigate, easier for students to navigate and also meets accessibility standards. So yeah, sometimes the answer is just removing something as opposed to working to make something accessible when it's more about how you present the information to begin with. Yeah, excellent. Go ahead.
It's worth noting, I think one of the big, like, I guess maybe eye openers was one of the meetings that we had as a group. We were downloading screen readers and realizing that even within screen readers, they're not the same. So we were getting like different answers to how the screen readers were reading material. And so it's not, you can't possibly make something that's going to work in all situations. So kind of like reframing the fact that what you have to do is just make it as simple as possible so that the most screen readers can access it, but also just the most amount of people with whatever accessibility issues they have can access it.
Yeah. Excellent. Susan, any input from you on your expectations, your big takeaway from the fellowship so far?
Well, I tend to see myself as like a task-oriented type person. So my expectation, and it continues to be, is looking for resources that say, do this, make it look like, and it's not so black and white as I guess I probably wanted it to be, because that's how my brain like frames things. I say to my classroom all the time that we're all different types of learners. So in my coursework, I tended to present a ton of stuff like, oh, you might like the pie chart, you might like this chart, you might like, different ways to present the same information. But then in realizing that some people can't see any of that, you start to re-ask yourself, much like my colleagues have already said, is that do you need this information at all? Is it necessary? How can I find the most simple way to get it out to everyone without, and when you say simple, I feel like that's almost a bit condescending, and I don't mean it that way, but most structurally formatted way for the information to get to everyone, so that it's across the board. And even in reviewing, we all get those beloved course evaluations, just get released, and I take them very seriously. I always tell my students, if you're not liking something, I want to fix it, and so one of the class that I'm actually working on, one person commented a little bit about organization and wanting things differently, and other people are saying it's great, but then I focus on that one person. It's like, if that one person's struggling, then I need to, work on it to make sure that one person isn't anymore. So I guess nice irony that it was the class that I'm working on for the fellowship, but I don't know, I feel like that was a bit scattered. But that's where I am at with all of this.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. And like you said, it's an evolving process, and there is a balance between, yes, there are checklist items that you can use to be very task oriented, but then there's also that broader overarching perspective that takes a little bit more thought and consideration in terms of the overall culture of accessibility. So does anyone in the audience have any questions for our fellows? We've had just an informal discussion of their motivation, expectations, big takeaway points. Faith, I see your hand up.
Hi, good morning. Can you all hear me? Okay, great. I just introduce myself. I'm a professional staff member in Penfield Library, interlibrary loan. And also, full disclosure, I have a 19-year-old son who's neurodiverse and will be attending school here in the fall. So I'm excited for him, and I just really am always curious about accessibility. So I'm grateful to know that this group exists and that you all are passionate about really, like you said, Emily, removing barriers. You're not adding things, but you're taking away the intricacies that are a struggle for neurodiverse. And Sue, you spoke to, like, you didn't want to use the word simple, but for me, simple equals straightforward, and just really makes it a clear path for anybody who struggles with all that excess noise. So my question is, how are you getting feedback on the strategies you have implemented? Are you asking students? And what has their feedback then? And also, do you work directly at all with accessibility resources or even like OLS tutoring to implement some of that? Thank you all.
Sure. So I can speak more broadly to some of your questions. So the Accessibility Fellowship is housed within the work group on accessibility practices. And so the work group we have a representative from Accessibility Resources who is on that committee. So the fellowship is part of a larger initiative. So yes, we do get input from those different offices on campus. In terms of the individual fellowship, I can turn it over to the fellows and let them talk about the types of feedback they have received so far. But just in part of the initial fellowship, usually it's things like accessibility checkers that they can use to check against the work that they have established so far. And then having the group work is great for problems that might not have a checker in place, right? Like, so there's a checker for Google Documents, right? So you can run the checker and get your output on the accessibility of that document. But what I've really valued about this group of fellows in working with them is that they've thought about other larger scale things that might have to be an individual decision of a faculty member or in collaboration with students that might not have an easy fix. So I'll turn it over to the fellows. You can all just jump in and share your perspectives on that. That's a great question, Faith.
Sue, did you want to go?
No, go ahead.
All right, we'll just go in the same order, I guess. I think your questions and your circumstances do make me think about what we do as fellows. The fellows, our main tasks are to develop one of our courses to be more accessible for the semester after we start. So this fall is the big push for us on our course. So this is a learning experience for us, not immediately having outcomes, right? So it's been trickling out into my classes. So I will, for example, I use slides a lot in my courses because it's a visual major. And I've asked my students at the end of each class, did that presentation work for you? Was anything in that difficult to understand, difficult to see, difficult to experience? Things like that. I've asked about the materials when I've been handing them out, the same kinds of questions. I don't think I really give enough time for focused feedback on that, to be quite honest. It's been sort of an afterthought. But the other thing that I was just thinking about when you were speaking is, you know, I have several neurodiverse folks in my family, among the kids and nephews. And we've really worked with them to be advocates for themselves and to not be ashamed or feel like they are burdening somebody if they are asking for support. And I think that's something that doesn't necessarily get addressed by what we are doing. We're sort of focusing again on the architecture of the courses. But I have been spending a lot of time in my courses trying to sort of introduce at different moments of openness to understanding neurodiverse needs by sharing things about my own life, my family, because I think that makes it a little bit more human for students, because one of the challenges we have as college faculty is we don't get an IEP, right? We don't get to see, we don't know unless the student shares with us what their needs are. And I experience a lot of students do not share what their needs are. This past semester, I had a student who failed my course. And in my perspective, he just didn't complete the work. His mom reached out to me afterwards, which is a little bit challenging. I'd say don't be the mom who reaches out, be the mom who encourages the student to reach out in college. But I could understand because she was in a panic. And she revealed to me his neurodiversity and things that I could have changed assignments for him, right? Given him alternate assignments, but he never spoke with me. So I chose to do a retroactive redo on giving him a separate assignment to reconstitute his grade. But that's only because mom reached out and then she encouraged him to reach out. I would never have known that. And my perspective on him would have been, he doesn't read his assignments, he doesn't put the work in, he doesn't complete his assignments. What's my perspective on this student? That they're lazy, that they are not interested and engaged, that they don't care about their grades. Because I have no other information to draw from. So I just think that it's on the faculty side, the best we can do is present ourselves as very open to understanding and be receptive and talk about, I'm happy to make alternative assignments, et cetera. And then it's really like the hope that the support structure that brings the student into our classroom, the families, Office of Learning Services, et cetera, really encourages them to be open and share what their needs are.
Yeah, and just to comment on Amy's story there, essentially what Amy said is just that transparency to students that you are open. So even though the Accessibility Fellowship focuses on broad skills related to accessibility, we also connect it to larger inclusive pedagogical initiatives, such as things like having alternative assignments, options for flexibility in course grading or course assignments. And the philosophy that I have too, similar to Amy, is just that openness. So even though some of the goals of having accessible course materials is to remove a barrier so that a student does not have to disclose if they don't want to, the openness will encourage students to disclose, which will just help you help them even more. And I have seen a dramatic shift since having that openness in my classes, that far more students will disclose, far more students will establish relationships with me in terms of helping them through the course and ensuring that they're set up for success. So I think that's another cultural shift that this fellowship and the accessibility work group more broadly can help with, in terms of making material more accessible for students, but then also shifting the culture of how faculty approach students or have alternative options for students. So Michelle, I see your hand up. Is that for a next question?
Yeah, a comment and then a question.
Go for it.
Hi, everybody. First of all, thank you to the current round of fellows, both for being here today, but also I know this is a big time commitment, and it's great to see folks that are passionate to continue doing this work. So the first thing I wanted to share is just with Faith. So Emily's talked about the work group on accessibility practices, and while we know that some of the outcomes for our students are kind of in a lag time, right? Like as we're putting in the work to make all of these changes, we don't exactly know yet the full impact on the students directly. But what the work group has been evaluating is looking back at our 25 fellows that we currently have so far, and at a minimum, understanding their impact on the actual, like, sort of measurable accessibility of their courses. So our learning management system has a built-in sort of score that it gives both components and the courses overall. And what we've been able to discern is that our fellows have significantly higher scores on average in those across their courses, not just their courses that they designed during their fellowship year, but across their entire sort of book of courses. Those are higher scores. And maybe more exciting, so do the departments overall that our fellows come from. And so this is, and not to the same extent, of course, but we do see a bump in those departments that have had fellows in them, indicating that there's at least some spillover effect that's happening there too. So I think though, that the sort of then where the rubber hits the road, right, is thinking about, can we also look at, evaluate, compare student, those evaluations, the student, feedback that comes out of those, or just more deliberately ask students specifically about it. But know that we are sort of kind of trying to constantly be looking at and evaluating the impact of this program. What we're finding though is that the impact, it's sort of, it's on a continuum. So we can kind of really measure tangible things straight away, like, how their courses are like structurally looking. But those longer impacts, I think, are a little bit still further out for us to be able to evaluate. But I do have a question for the current fellows. So one thing that I noticed after I was a fellow, right, or even during my fellowship time, I'm sure Emily feels the same way, is that you start thinking really diligently about your coursework, but then you start observing sort of accessibility issues in a much broader way, whether that's on campus and the committees that you're part of, but also in your disciplines and your fields. And selfishly, I want to ask Amy first to answer this because I am on the board of a film festival in Rochester. And I'm curious if you've observed anything, in kind of the broader film industry in terms of trends around accessibility or things that you've started to sort of pay attention to, pick up on with captioning and, kind of if you're seeing sort of more movement in that space as well. But I'd love to hear from other folks as well. I just want to start with Amy.
I used to be offended by people who put captions on when they didn't, quote, need them. Because I'm like, you need to visually experience the film. You're busy reading the film. We're not putting captions on. Until my stepdaughter expressed the reason she needed captioning is because she can't process the dialogue quickly. And I realized that was why she was constantly asking us to pause, and she was going, wait, what happened? Wait, what's going on? And so at first, of course, I was just annoyed. I'm like, pay attention. And then as I became an accessibility fellow, I thought, oh my gosh, I'm ruining her evening experiences because I have some way with my brain thinking you should be experiencing film. So I think that the policy of putting captioning on for something like a film festival is something that a board should discuss, understand why people need it, and then make it a standard policy and include it in a program so that if you are providing captioning, you say it's standard for all of the films and why. So if people have complaints, they can feel bad about their complaints, but basically put it back on them and be like, don't you want everybody to understand? I do think that the other thing that is challenging, like in my department, everybody wants to make all of their documents visual. And so the syllabi come out with like, a camera here and a film image there and this, and they're completely inaccessible. And I think of the same things as programs, et cetera. So I think that one of the possibilities is if you want to have that, then get a QR code with it clicks to an accessible version of that document so that you can do a both and. I think people need to start finding solutions where they don't say, well, what happens is when I use this template, it's all words and bullet points and titles, and I no longer have the visual elements. Think about doing both things. So that would be my response, but I have not seen a bigger response in the industry. I think there is sort of a sense of this is a visual industry. I think people think we are accessible because we have auditory, we have visual, right? What we don't realize is that's still limiting. So.
Ashlee or Susan, any input that you want to share?
Yeah, I wanted to, I guess I just thought of it as Amy was finishing up when you said the QR code for an accessibility version. The alternative too is to have a QR code for the more fluffy version, and it really struck me when Faith said creating a clear path for someone who struggles with excess noise. I feel like there's a lot of ways to relate to that. And going back to the class that I said I'm working on, I called them my moles because I had two students who I'd worked with in the past. One was in a current face-to-face class, and the other one I had had in a face-to-face class before. They were both in the online class, and I was like, I want you guys to tell me if something's not working, if there's, you know, something that needs to be clarified. And for those students, it was fine. Like they kept saying, no, we love this, we love that. But in seeing feedback from that other student through my course evaluations, I'm realizing what they liked is exactly what this student didn't like. And so I think it resonates so much with me, the way that Faith worded it, gives me something to focus on in trying to eliminate some of that excess noise that maybe would be more valid for all, so that it isn't just, you know, these students are doing great, but those are also students who are super personable. They're out of the box. That's how I had a relationship with them. They were, you know, eager to come and talk and ask questions. And through all this, we're trying to reach an entirely different population, or at least a secondary population that you might not have that immediate engaging relationship with. So I don't know if that necessarily answered any questions, but I felt like it tied in, wanted to share.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ashlee can chime in about the field specific from psychology at least, but I will say that I've noticed it a lot at conferences in terms of accessibility. And I will say that the Teaching of Psychology annual conference is nearly perfect with their accessibility standards. They send out guidance for speakers in advance. So when I was a speaker, I received a template of here's how to make your presentation accessible. Here are things to consider for the actual space that you will be in. They had live captioning enabled when I walked into the room. My presentation was set up. Don't think there was a microphone in the room. That's going to be the only thing that I noticed that was not quite, but it was a relatively small room, but still. So I've seen shifts in the field of psychology with respect to teaching of psychology. But at other psychology-based conferences, you know, you still have presenters who are using a blue background with yellow font, which is astounding sometimes. So yeah, that is one thing that I have paid more attention to is conferences and accessibility at conferences. And Ashlee and I have talked about approaching research in psychology from an accessibility standpoint. And I see Lindsay nodding her head as well. We have another psychologist in the room. Yeah. Ashlee, any other insight that you have from psychology's perspective on field specific changes that Michelle was commenting on?
Yeah, this kind of relates a little bit back to what both Michelle and Faith had mentioned, but one of the things I really appreciated about like our meetings as fellows is that it's a good spot for us to ask, well, first of all, like just really stupid questions that we feel like are okay to ask, like how do we make a heading? But also a lot more complicated questions that sometimes, so one of our first discussions was kind of like, in what ways are accessibility practices making obviously our courses better for more people, but also in what ways do those practices in some ways sometimes hinder others? And so a couple of things came up specifically related to psychology classes, one of which was it had to do with captioning videos. And it was, this discussion happened on the day that I had been displaying a video of a psychological interview. And of course, being in the accessibilities fellowship, I immediately turned on captions. But one of the things I was asking them to do was to sort of evaluate the nonverbal characteristics and the facial expressions that were happening in the video. And so we had this discussion of like, well, how do we handle this situation where we want them to focus on not the captions, but we need to provide the captions for certain individuals. And Amy was also mentioning that, very similar to what you had said in your comment about like with the film studies, how do we balance those two things? And so just kind of learning that like sometimes there's not a right answer for everyone in all situations. But I think providing extra information is always good, even if that's not necessarily that you provide both options in class, but at least having an accessible option available. and also tailoring it to like what you're actually doing in that specific time period. If you are asking them to focus on the visuals, like in facial expressions, okay, maybe don't include the captions there. Maybe we'll replay it a second time with captions, things like that. And also one thing that was brought up in the psychology class was my class I was working on for this was abnormal psychology, which we talk a lot about different neurodiversity issues and different accessibility issues. And students often share a lot about themselves in that class. They feel it's a place they feel comfortable sharing some of the issues that they're dealing with personally or their family members. And we actually had several people in that class who were permitted to record the sessions. And so we had kind of a discussion about legal issues that were coming up in terms of what's my responsibility as a professor when I know that students are going to be disclosing information in that class. And I also know that students are recording that information in the class for accessibility purposes. And how do we balance that? And so that's when I did actually have to call in was it the Office of Accessibility Resources that we contacted?
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah,
had to actually like talk these issues over with the staff there in terms of
yeah.
what should I do here? And I think we finally ended up essentially just making sure that people in the class knew that this could be being recorded by a student. Obviously, we're not going to say there's a student in the class recording it, and letting them know that this was a possibility and that if they shared, they should be comfortable sharing in a way where this was recorded. But sharing with them that, this is the policy for these recordings. They're deleted after this many days. We use this system. And I think sharing stuff like that also leads to that culture of accessibility where the students know you're thinking about it. And it makes you like a person that's a little bit easier to contact with any questions or issues you have. So there's been a lot of really complicated things that I think have been, it's been nice to have a place to discuss those with other people who are thinking about them.
Yeah, and that is the good part about having the fellowship connected with the work group on accessibility practices is, yeah, we were able to connect with accessibility resources. And so the group that we've been working with so far with this group of fellows, we've been brainstorming kind of like what Ashlee said, when do we have conflicts that bump up against best practices and accessibility? And Ashlee's example with the captioning and the videos is great. I've had students with ADHD disclose to me that they have difficulty following both the visual content of a video along with the captions. And so it's a matter of just ensuring that you have both options available for students, especially if it's a video that you show in class, you have to make that available to the students after the class as well, so that they can go back and view the information. And we've also been talking about how to make information more transparent from the Office of Accessibility Services, like the recording, right? Many of us, I did not know what it meant when a student was recording my class, right? It's not on their personal device or their personal phone. They have specific software that is deleted. We received guidance that we can ask students to pause the recording, right? Like, so if it does become a discussion that is about more personal information, you can request that the students pause the recording and then resume the recording when the course content gets back on track. Go ahead, Faith.
I just want to offer this one anecdote because it's interesting. I also have, my daughter has type 1 diabetes. So we live in a family with a medical accessibility issue also. And sometimes my son who has autism, he doesn't want to advocate or speak up or own it. And I relate it to him as it's the same as your sister's diabetes. It doesn't go away. It's not anything to worry about. She takes her medicine. This is part of who you are. So it's interesting to me, and this is not even remotely a criticism. It's just an observation that we struggle with accessibility for neurodiversity, right? The gray area of what's allowed and what's not allowed. But again, to simplify it, if you put it in the terms of it was a medical need, like my daughter is always allowed to have food with her, always allowed to have snacks, because if she doesn't, she could die. or if somebody was in a wheelchair and had a physical need, like there would never be a gray area, right? So when we think about accessibility in terms of neurodiversity, like in terms of the captioning, like do they need it or don't they need it? And we simplify it in terms of, well, if somebody needed their juice box or if somebody needed a handicap accessible chair, we would do that without question, right? Without question. So like in terms of neurodiversity and continuing to advocate for that and continuing to really push forward accessibility, like eliminating those gray areas and realizing they didn't ask for this either, right? Like we worked hard, we've worked with everything in high school, and then they're coming to college where it's a totally different atmosphere. And I know for my son, like he wants to leave that all behind, and yet it's still part of who he is. So I appreciate the faculty that are really welcoming that conversation and being specific and talking about, you know, if you have a personal connection to somebody with autism and using the terminology, like the specific phrases, will continue to advance that. And remembering that there's not really a gray area. It is a need there. So thank you all again for all that you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Faith. Go ahead, Ashlee.
I hope I didn't like miscommunicate. I certainly don't mean like a gray area in terms of providing, you know, necessary things. What I mean is like sometimes there's conflicting needs
Yeah.
in your classes. Whereas like somebody needs something and it hinders, like Emily mentioned, someone with ADHD versus someone with autism might actually, the needs within the class, like if we're showing a video, might conflict between those two people. And just know that like we have to be able to offer multiple ways, because it's so much that it's impossible to make it accessible for everyone. And so just like trying to do your absolute best to have all of the options available.
And I know we're at time, Maggie. I'm assuming you have another session coming up. So
Could I just say
Amy,
one thing?
one quick go for it. Yeah.
The other thing I became very aware of is how many of our students have gone through their lives undiagnosed with neurodiversity and have no idea, so they can't even advocate for themselves. So universal design for learning means that we're really making it better for all of them.
Exactly. So yep, that's the goal of this fellowship, learning skills, but then also thinking about just those broader pedagogies and culture of care and culture of access that we can continue to advocate for on campus. And so for folks who are interested in neurodiversity, please stay in touch with me. That's my passion area. I teach a course on it. I'm hopeful to continue workshops related to it and sort of bring it to the forefront of some campus initiatives. So thank you so much to everyone for coming. Thank you to Maggie for recording, and to all the fellows for your hard work so far this year. All right. Thanks everyone. Have a good day.